I learned very early in life that silence is often mistaken for weakness. People see a calm woman and assume there is nothing sharp behind her eyes. They see patience and think it means fear. They see kindness and believe it must come from necessity, not choice. For years, I allowed them to believe that about me. My name is Eleanor, and for most of my life, I was the woman people spoke over, decided for, and dismissed without hesitation. Not because I lacked intelligence, not because I lacked strength, but because I never felt the need to announce either. I raised my children quietly. I worked quietly. I endured quietly. And in my family, quiet meant invisible. When my son married Julia, the assumptions grew louder. Julia came from a family that valued appearances more than substance. They spoke confidently, laughed loudly, and measured people by what they displayed, not by what they carried inside. From the very first dinner, I noticed how her mother's eyes moved before her smile did. She scanned my clothes, my hands, my home, as if calculating something she didn't plan to say out loud. A simple woman, they must have thought. A woman who survived by luck. A woman who knew her place. I never corrected them. At family gatherings, conversations flowed around me like water around a stone. They discussed investments, properties, connections. They spoke about money with the casual arrogance of people who had never known its absence. When they asked me questions, they were never real questions. They were performances. So, Eleanor, what do you do these days? As if the answer could not possibly impress them. I keep busy, I would say, smiling gently. That was enough for them to move on. They never asked how. They never asked where. They never asked why. I never seemed worried. And I never volunteered the answers. What they didn't know was that my quiet life had been built carefully, deliberately, over decades. Every decision measured, every sacrifice calculated. I had buried a husband. I had raised children alone. I had rebuilt myself from grief with discipline, not pity. While they were busy displaying success, I was quietly securing it. But people rarely fear what they cannot see, so they underestimated me freely, and I let them. The moment I realized just how small they believed me to be came on an ordinary Sunday afternoon. We were gathered at Julia's parents' house, the kind of home designed to impress: high ceilings, polished surfaces, furniture that looked expensive but uncomfortable. Everything was staged to send a message. At some point, the conversation turned to money. It always did. Julia's father leaned back in his chair and spoke loudly about a temporary setback in one of his ventures. He laughed it off, but I noticed something in his voice. Not confidence, but strain. Still, he smiled and said, "You know how business is. You win some, you lose some." Then he looked at me. "And you, Eleanor," he said almost kindly, "you must be grateful not having to worry about these things." The table went quiet, not because the comment was kind, but because it was careless. Julia smiled politely. My son looked uncomfortable. Everyone waited for me to respond. I could have corrected him. I could have explained. I could have defended myself. Instead, I lowered my eyes slightly and said, "I've learned to live within my means." He nodded, satisfied. In that moment, I understood something important. They didn't see me as harmless. They saw me as irrelevant. And that, I realized, was far more dangerous for them than it was for me. Because people protect themselves from threats. They never protect themselves from someone they believe doesn't matter. Over the next few months, things began to change for them quietly and not in their favor. Julia's father's business troubles deepened. The confident conversations became tense. The laughter became forced. One evening, my son called me. "Mom," he said carefully, "Julia's parents are struggling more than they're admitting." I listened. I always listened. Soon after, Julia herself came to visit me alone. She sat on my couch, fidgeting with her hands, her confidence gone. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked uncertain. "Eleanor," she said, hesitating, "I didn't realize how steady you are." I smiled softly. "You don't need to," I replied. "Most people don't." She swallowed. "My parents might need help." And that was the moment the balance shifted. because help is a form of power and power reveals truth. Julia didn't ask directly at first. She spoke around the subject, carefully choosing her words, as if afraid the wrong sentence might break something fragile. My parents are overwhelmed, she said. They made some decisions they shouldn't have, trusted the wrong people. I nodded, not interrupting. They're trying to keep it quiet, she continued, her voice lowering. They don't want anyone to know. I looked at her then, really looked at her. The woman who once spoke over me, who smiled politely while underestimating me, now sat in my living room unsure of her footing. And why are you telling me this? I asked gently. She hesitated. Because you seem calm, even now, even when things fall apart. I smiled but said nothing. Finally, she exhaled. They might need financial help. There it was. I didn't react the way she expected. I didn't gasp. I didn't lean forward. I didn't ask questions. I simply stood, walked to the window, and looked outside for a long moment. Silence makes people uncomfortable. It forces them to face their own thoughts. When I turned back, Julia was watching me carefully. I can help, I said calmly, but not the way you think. Her eyes widened slightly. What do you mean? I don't lend money blindly, I replied. I invest, and I don't invest in people who refuse to be honest. Her expression shifted, confusion mixed with something close to fear. You mean you'd want to see the numbers? Yes, I said, well, all of them. She stared at me. In that moment, I saw it clearly, the first crack in their certainty about who I was. A week later, Julia returned with her parents. They arrived stiffly, polite but tense. The confidence they once wore so easily now sat awkwardly on their shoulders. We sat at my dining table, modest, uncluttered, nothing designed to impress. Julia's father cleared his throat. We appreciate you seeing us, Eleanor. I nodded. Of course. He began explaining, opus rather justifying, bad timing, market shifts, unfortunate partnerships, temporary losses. I listened without interruption. When he finished, I folded my hands calmly. You've made a series of high-risk decisions without sufficient safeguards, I said, and now you're surprised the outcome wasn't favorable. The room went still. Julia's mother stared at me. You understand this? I've lived it, I replied. That was when I told them the truth. Not dramatically, not emotionally, simply clearly. I told them about the company my late husband and I built together from nothing, about how, after his death, I was advised to sell, to take the payout, to live quietly, about how I refused, how I studied, how I rebuilt, how I learned when to trust, and more importantly, when not to. I told them I never stopped investing, carefully, patiently, quietly. Their faces changed with every sentence. You never mentioned any of this, Julia's father said finally. I was never asked, I replied. Silence filled the room again, heavier this time. Finally, he asked, So, what are you proposing? I met his eyes steadily. I will help stabilize your situation, I said, but the control will be mine, transparency, boundaries, and respect. Julia's mother shifted uncomfortably. And if we don't agree? She asked. I smiled, not cruelly, not proudly. Then you'll find another way, I said, and I will wish you well. They exchanged glances. People often believe power announces itself loudly. It doesn't. True power waits, and they felt it now. They agreed, not because they trusted me, but because they had no better option. Over the following months, the dynamic changed completely. Meetings became quieter, decisions became slower. My words, once ignored, were now carefully noted. Julia watched all of this silently. One evening, she stayed behind after her parents left. I was wrong about you, she said softly. I looked at her. You weren't wrong. You were just certain. She smiled sadly. Why didn't you ever say anything before? I thought for a moment. Because wisdom doesn't need witnesses, I replied. It only needs patience. From that day on, the way my family spoke to me changed. The way they looked at me changed. The way they listened changed. Not because I demanded it, but because they finally understood what silence had been protecting. I never raised my voice. I never defended myself. I never proved anything. I simply waited for the moment when truth could no longer hide. Today, people ask me how I stayed calm for so long, how I tolerated being underestimated, how I didn't grow bitter when others spoke over me, decided for me, or dismissed me entirely. The truth is simpler than they expect. I always knew who I was, long before anyone else tried to define me. Pain teaches you many things if you let it, but the most valuable lesson is this: you do not owe the world a performance of your strength. You don't have to explain yourself to be powerful. You don't have to prove anything to be worthy, and you don't have to raise your voice for your presence to be felt. Let them misunderstand you. Let them underestimate you. Let them speak with certainty about things they do not truly see, because life has a way of testing everyone eventually, and when that moment comes, they will remember who remained steady, who did not panic, who did not chase validation. Wisdom is not loud, power does not rush, and silence, when chosen deliberately, is not weakness. It is preparation. Strength that announces itself too early often fades quickly, but strength that waits, observes, and endures lasts. I learned that the hard way, and I carry it with me now, not as a shield, but as a truth. Pain was never the end of my story. It was the beginning of my understanding, and understanding, when earned, speaks for itself.